We all carry a private clock inside our heads. You remember yesterday, you are aware of right now, and some part of you is already leaning toward tomorrow. That feeling is so ordinary that most people never treat it as a scientific question. It feels like a fact of life, like gravity or hunger. But physics and philosophy have been arguing about what time actually is for more than a century. And one of the strangest answers on the table is called the block universe, also known as Eternalism. It is not science fiction. It is a way of reading what Einstein's relativity seems to suggest about the structure of reality. The central claim is simple to state and hard to swallow. The past, the present, and the future would all exist at once, not as stages the cosmos passes through, but as parts of a single four-dimensional whole. If that sounds abstract, stay with me, because the idea becomes clearer once we use pictures our minds already understand. Before we touch equations or paradoxes, I want to name the tension you probably already feel. On one side is your lived experience, the sense that moments arrive, stay briefly, and vanish. On the other side is a physical theory that treats time as a dimension much like space, something you can measure but not necessarily travel through in the way stories travel on a page. The block universe sits in that tension. It does not ask you to pretend you do not feel time moving. It asks whether the moving is in the world or in you. So here is the question we will carry through this entire journey. Does time flow the way it feels, like a river carrying us from birth toward death? Or is flow a story our consciousness tells while something more static sits underneath? The block universe answers the second way, not maybe as poetry, but as a serious interpretation compatible with modern physics. I need to be honest from the start. This is not a proven fact you can read off a laboratory display. It is one way to make sense of relativity's mathematics. Still, before we leave everyday intuition, notice how deeply presentism is baked into language. We say the past is gone, and the future is not here yet. We mourn people who are no longer with us as if their moments stopped existing in a strong sense. We promise to meet tomorrow as if tomorrow is an open slot waiting to be filled. That grammar is powerful because it tracks experience. Eternalism does not ask you to throw the grammar away at the dinner table. It asks whether the grammar describes the universe or describes how conscious organisms sample the universe. That is a smaller correction than it first sounds, and a larger one than many physicists admit in casual interviews. Let us begin with the book, because books are one of the cleanest metaphors the block universe offers. Picture a novel with 500 pages. Page 1 exists, page 250 exists, page 500 exists. The story does not become real only when you reach a given page. The entire volume is already printed, bound, and sitting on a shelf. When you read, you move your attention from one page to the next. That movement creates the powerful illusion that events are happening now for the first time. You feel suspense because you do not yet know what page 300 says. But page 300 is not being written by your reading. It was there before you opened the cover. Now transfer that picture to the cosmos. The block universe suggests that reality might resemble the whole book rather than a single turning page. Your birth would be an early chapter. Your childhood, your awkward years, your victories and mistakes would all be segments of the same bound manuscript. Even the day you have not lived yet would already be part of the structure, not a blank waiting for ink. This is where people often push back, and fairly so. It feels like fatalism. It feels like tomorrow is already decided. The interpretation does not have to mean you are meaningless, but it does mean the future is not an empty region being filled in moment by moment. In the block picture, it is already there. The way the last page of a novel is already there. Notice what the metaphor does and does not do. It does not claim you can flip ahead and read your future like a spoiler. You are still a reader moving forward through the text with no practical access to later chapters. It only claims that later chapters exist in the same sense earlier ones do. That distinction matters because many objections attack a version of the block universe that nobody needs to defend. The book analogy is not proof. It is a way to train intuition before we talk about space-time diagrams and world lines. But it is a useful training device precisely because it separates existence from experience. Everything may be printed, you still turn one page at a time. There is another lesson hidden in the book. A historian reading about ancient Rome does not create Rome by reading. Rome is described on pages the historian accesses later than the events, but the events are not less real for being passed in the reading order. In the block view, being past or future is somewhat like being on an earlier or later page. It is a position inside a larger object, not a measure of how real something is. That reversal is subtle and it takes time to absorb. We usually treat the present as the only fully real moment. Eternalism challenges that habit directly. You might ask whether the book metaphor breaks if the author rewrites chapters. Real books have editions. The block picture is not about drafts. It is about a completed four-dimensional structure. If the structure changes, that would itself be represented as a different block, not as a block magically rewriting from nothing. In physics talk, we describe what the equations say about events and relation. We are not secretly smuggling an editor who erases Tuesday. When people object that they feel they are writing their lives in real time, Eternalists nod and say yes, that feeling is part of the set of events too. Hold the book image in mind, because we are going to keep returning to the same theme in different costumes. Existence versus access, the whole story versus the page you see. With that theme in place, let us add a second metaphor that many teachers use next, because it highlights the role of consciousness in a way books only imply. Imagine a film instead of a novel. A feature film contains millions of individual frames. When you watch in a theater, frame 1 appears, then frame 2, then frame 3, and your brain stitches the sequence into motion. You perceive characters moving, speaking, changing. The flow feels undeniable because the projector is doing a very specific job. It illuminates one still image after another at a fixed rate, but the entire movie file, whether on celluloid or on a hard drive, already contains every frame at once. Nothing about the storage format requires motion. Motion is what playback creates in you. According to the block universe, our consciousness might work a little like that projector. The universe would contain all the frames, and awareness would light them in sequence. That does not make the sequence fake in the emotional sense. Fear during a scary scene is real fear. Joy during a reunion is real joy. What changes is the metaphysical story you tell about what is happening. The block view says the flow is in the playback, not in the archive. Physics supplies the archive, or something analogous to it. Mind supplies playback, or something analogous to that. Whether you find that liberating or chilling depends on what you hoped time was. The film metaphor also clarifies a common misunderstanding. People sometimes think eternalism means nothing changes, but a film can show change in every frame while remaining a fixed object overall. A character can grow, break, heal, and die without the file rewriting itself during projection. Change is a pattern inside the block, not evidence that the block is dissolving. When physicists talk about four-dimensional spacetime, they are talking about a structure where events are related to one another geometrically. They are not denying that events include wars, births, storms, and apologies. They are denying that those events are assembled live on a blank stage. There is a practical detail worth stating plainly. You cannot rewind your life the way you rewind a movie, at least not with today's technology. Metaphors are maps, not passports. Still, the map is instructive because it shows how fixed structure and felt sequence can coexist. You can be fully convinced that frame 10,000 is coming next, while also believing frame 10,000 is already part of the complete work. That combination is exactly what Eternalism proposes at the level of reality itself. The projector moves, the film is whole. Sound in a film gives another useful detail. Dialogue and music are synchronized to frames, yet we experience them as flowing streams. The brain is extraordinarily good at stitching modalities together. That stitching power is part of why Eternalists trust consciousness to explain passage without requiring a cosmic conveyor belt. Skeptics reply that explaining passage by consciousness sounds like putting the magic inside skulls instead of stars. That reply has bite. It is why the passage of time remains the flagship objection, not a side note. We now have two everyday images, a book and a film, both pointing at the same strange idea. Reality may be complete in a way our attention is not. The next step is to ask what physics actually says about such a picture, because metaphors alone cannot carry a scientific channel. This is where space and time stop being separate background stages and become one intertwined entity. In special relativity, space and time are not independent arenas. They form a single object physicists call spacetime. That word is not branding. It marks a real merger. Measurements of distance and measurements of duration can mix when observers move relative to one another. Two events that one person treats as simultaneous, another person may treat as separated in time. That is not a failure of clock. It is a feature of the theory, tested many times. Once time is tied to space this tightly, it becomes harder to treat time as a universal river everyone shares drop for drop. The book and the film are not competing metaphors. They stress different edges of the same block. The book stresses that all parts exist before you visit them. The film stresses that sequence can be an effective presentation. Together, they prepare you for a move physicists actually make. From stories and language to geometry in space-time, geometry sounds colder than stories, but it has an advantage. It can be tested. Clocks in orbit really do tick differently. Muons really do reach the ground when their brief lifetimes should forbid it. Something about time is not what your childhood intuition assumed. The block universe is one attempt to take that something seriously all the way to the bottom. Instead of imagining the universe as a three-dimensional space that evolves as time marches forward, Eternalism invites you to imagine a four-dimensional object: length, width, height, and time. You are not only the person reading these words today. In this picture, you would be a long curve, or a thread, running from your birth through every childhood afternoon, every ordinary Tuesday, every decision and accident, all the way to your death. Physicists call that thread a world line. Each point along it is you at one instant, located somewhere with some velocity, carrying whatever thoughts and atoms belong to that coordinate. A world line is not a metaphor for life the way a self-help slogan might be. It is a geometric object defined in the mathematics of relativity. Your world line is fixed in the block picture because the block contains all events with time treated as another axis. Moving along the axis is not something the universe does globally. It is something we describe from the inside. If you try to visualize it, do not force yourself to see four dimensions perfectly. Nobody does. The useful part is structural. You are extended in time the way you are extended in space. You are not a point. You are a history. Physicists often draw space-time diagrams with time on the vertical axis and space on the horizontal axis. A world line is then a curve moving upward through the diagram as time coordinate increases. Two people moving relative to each other draw different diagrams, slicing the same events differently. The diagrams are not mere teaching cartoon. They are tools engineers and researchers use because they work. Eternalism reads the success of those tools as evidence that time is more like space than folklore suggested. Opponents read the same success as evidence about measurement, not existence. Same diagrams, different philosophical caption. Think about your body in space for a moment. Your hand occupies a region near the keyboard or the armrest. Your foot occupies a region near the floor. Nobody says your hand is more real than your foot because they occupy different places. Eternalism suggests a similar attitude toward moments. Your 10th birthday and your 40th birthday would occupy different places along the time axis, but neither would be more real in the ultimate sense. Our language fights this idea because we say the past was and the future will be. The block view prefers was, is, and will be as different locations on the same map. This is where Albert Einstein enters the story in a serious way. Not as decoration, but as origin. Relativity undermined the old notion of absolute simultaneity, the idea that everyone could agree on what is happening right now across the universe. If right now is not universal, then carving reality into past, present, and future looks less like physics and more like perspective. Different observers slice space-time differently. The slices are equally valid within the theory. That does not force eternalism by itself, but it opens the door wide enough that many philosophers walked through. Let us slow down and mark what is established science and what is interpretation. Established science includes time dilation, length contraction, and the relativity of simultaneity. Established science includes the success of equations predicting those effects. Eternalism is a philosophical reading of what those equations imply about existence. You can accept the measurements and still reject the block. Many people do. But you cannot understand why eternalism attracts serious minds unless you see how naturally it follows from treating space-time as one piece of geometry rather than a moving spotlight. Before we move to consciousness and free will, we need one more anchor in everyday intuition, because the block picture sounds like it erases the difference between remembering and predicting. It does not. Remembering access is part of your world line you label past. Predicting attempts to model part you label future. The labels remain useful, even if eternalism is true. What changes is the metaphysical weight you assign them. In the block, prediction is not creating the future. It is inferring a region you have not yet encountered and experienced. Memory is not preserving a vanished world. It is accessing a region you no longer occupy in experience. So why does time feel like it passes if, according to the block universe, it does not pass in the fundamental sense? That question is fair, and defenders of eternalism do not dodge it. They relocate the answer. The passage would not be a global march of the cosmos. It would be the way conscious creatures sample their world lines. You experience one instant, then another, and the sampling order creates the sense of flow. The flow is real as experience. The claim is that it is not real as an extra process happening to the entire universe at once. Picture a road built from beginning to end through a forest. The road exists whether or not anyone walks it tonight. Now picture a hiker with a flashlight moving along the surface. The beam reveals one patch of asphalt at a time. The revealed patch feels vivid. The patches ahead and behind sit in darkness from the hiker's point of view. Eternalism often uses exactly this image. The road is space-time, or the relevant part of it. The flashlight is awareness moving along a world line. The whole road exists. The light only shows a piece. This is one reason the block universe is not the same as saying nothing matters. The hiker still stumbles if the road is broken ahead. The hiker still feels cold when the beam crosses a windy ridge. Experience has texture even if the path is complete. What eternalism denies is that the path is being paved only 1 meter ahead of the boots. In the block picture, the paving is already done. Your boots are simply arriving at coordinates where the asphalt already is. That can sound cold until you remember how much of life already feels like discovery of what was waiting. Neuroscience adds another layer without solving the philosophy. The brain integrates memory, perception, and expectation into a moving window we call the present moment. That window is probably a few seconds wide, not a mathematical point. Some researchers think the feeling of flow comes from how predictions are updated when sensory data arrives. The block universe does not compete with those models. It sits at a different level. It asks whether the events the brain processes are all equally real in the fabric of the world. Eternalism says yes. Presentism says only a thin slice is real. The debate is about existence, not about whether brains are fascinating machines. When people first hear about four-dimensional space-time, they sometimes ask whether we are claiming the future is visible somewhere like a room next door. That is not the claim. The claim is about structure, not sightseeing. Events would be related to one another in a four-dimensional manifold, the technical term for a space that can be described with coordinate. Your future events would be events at later time coordinates along your world line, not ghosts you could chat with if you walked around the corner. Science fiction often mixes structural eternalism with time travel plots. This video is not doing that. We are asking what kind of thing time might be if relativity is right, not how to build a machine to visit next Christmas twice. If you have followed this far, you may already feel the next question forming. If the future is part of the structure, is your future already fixed? That is where eternalism collides with morality. We cannot avoid the free will conversation, and we should not pretend it has a tidy ending. If the block universe is correct, then events you call future are already included in space-time the way tomorrow's page is already included in the book. That does not automatically mean you can list what will happen. You are inside the story. You do not get to read ahead. But it does mean that whatever will happen would already be part of the totality in this interpretation. That is the sense in which people say the future is fixed, not fixed because you have no role, but fixed in the sense that there is no empty region being filled in as the universe waits for you to choose. Philosophers divide on what this implies for free will. And I need to say that clearly because popular summaries often flatten a live debate. One camp argues that if all moments exist, genuine choice is an illusion. Deliberation would be like watching a recording and mistaking it for live television. Another camp, often called compatibilist, argues that choices can be real choices even in a block world if they are yours in the right way, embedded in your character, your history, and your reasoning, even though the whole history exists as one piece. Both camps agree you feel like you choose. They disagree about what choosing means at the deepest level. There is no consensus here, and honest science communication should not pretend otherwise. Physics does not hand us a ballot on compatibility. It hands us a space-time framework that makes certain metaphysical stories easier or harder to tell. Eternalism makes the illusion story easier to tell. It also makes a sophisticated compatibilist story possible, where freedom means acting according to your motives without coercion. Even if the entire world line is one continuous curve, you can find brilliant people on multiple sides. The block universe opens the question. It does not close it with a gavel. Consider cause and effect for a moment, because intuitive paradoxes often start there. If everything is already in the block, do causes still cause? Eternalists usually say yes, but in a geometric language, one event can lie in the past light cone of another. Influence still propagates according to physical law. What is challenged is not correlation or mechanism. It is the idea that causation is the universe building the future from scratch. In the block, causation is a pattern of relations among events that all exist. A pattern can still explain why the window broke after the stone flew. Explanation and existence are different jobs. Each point on a world line is called an event in physics language. An event is not necessarily dramatic. It is a specification of where and when something happens, even if what happens is mundane. You reading this sentence is an event. A raindrop striking a window is an event. A supernova in a distant galaxy is an event. Eternalism treats the set of events as the basic furniture of the world. Worlds are patterns across that set. You are not a three-dimensional thing that lasts. You are a pattern extended across time. Even though you experience yourself as a moving present, that gap between pattern and experience is the whole philosophical drama. Some people hear fixed future and think nothing they do matter. That reaction is understandable, but it is not a forced conclusion. If your decision tomorrow is part of the block, then your decision is part of reality exactly as much as a supernova. You are not outside the universe watching a script. You are a process inside it. Compatibilists insist that moral responsibility tracks the internal structure of that process, whether or not the whole process is four-dimensional. Incompatibilists reply that responsibility requires an open future in a stronger sense. The conversation continues in philosophy departments and in late-night kitchen. Let us also separate two fears that get mixed together. One fear is that science will reveal you are a puppet. Another fear is that science will reveal the future cannot be changed. Eternalism mainly presses the second idea, and even there, change means something subtle. You can change your mind tomorrow. In the block picture, that change was always part of your world line. The word always triggers alarm, but it may only mean that the change is not a magical addition from outside spacetime. It is an event located at a time coordinate where deliberation happens. Language built for rivers struggles with statues. That struggle is part of why this topic fascinates people. Law and morality in human societies assume people can be responsible for actions in many contexts. Eternalism does not automatically destroy courts and contracts. Compatibilists argue that responsibility tracks whether you acted under coercion, deception, or illness, not whether your whole life is a four-dimensional curve. Incompatibilists worry that punishment and praise require a stronger kind of openness. The block universe intensifies an old philosophical argument. It does not invent it from scratch. If you care about justice, you should care about which version of freedom you need, because physics alone may not supply it. Some listeners worry that eternalism makes regret meaningless if the mistake is part of the block. Can you regret it in a deep sense? Philosophers who take regret seriously under eternalism usually say regret is itself an event in spacetime, a legitimate response to an event you now judge harmful. Regret does not require magic rewinding. It requires a mind that compares what happened with what might have been hoped. The block can contain both the mistake and the regret. Whether that satisfies you emotionally is a different question from whether it is internally consistent. Science channels should present the consistency argument and let the emotional verdict stay personal. We have now named the emotional cost of the block universe. It threatens stories we tell about openness, regret, and agency. The next step is historical. Why did this idea attract physicists and philosophers in the first place, rather than remaining a clever book metaphor forever? The block universe did not appear because someone wanted to annoy moralists. It grew largely from the success of Einstein's relativity. When different observers moving relative to one another disagree about which distant events are simultaneous, it becomes difficult to maintain a single cosmic present, a universal now slicing the universe into what exists and what does not. If simultaneity is relative, then what counts as the present may depend on how you move. That is a crack in the common sense picture wide enough to change metaphysics. Imagine two lightning strikes, one at the front of a train and one at the rear, observed by someone on the platform and someone riding the car. Relativity predicts that judgments about whether those strikes were simultaneous can disagree without either observer being mistaken about local measurements. That thought experiment is simplified, but the moral is real. Time order is not always absolute for separated events. Once you accept that, treating time as a dimension akin to space is less shocking. You are not privileging one universal slice. You are describing relations inside spacetime. Einstein himself spoke in ways that encouraged and ways that complicated eternalist reading. Popular quotes get weaponized on both sides. The safer historical claim is narrower. Relativity removed absolute time from physics in the Newtonian sense and replaced it with frame-dependent measurements united by geometry. Philosophers then asked what kind of existence events have if no observer has privileged access to the present. Eternalism is one answer. Presentism, which says only the present exists, is another. Growing block views, which say the past and present exist, but the future does not yet, are a third. Modern physics created the menu. It did not circle one item for you. Historically, Hermann Minkowski helped crystallize the space-time viewpoint after Einstein's special relativity, describing relativity as a theory of four-dimensional geometry. The phrase block universe became popular later, but the geometric instinct is older than internet explainers. When you hear that time might be a dimension like space, you are hearing a tradition with textbooks, conferences, and dissenters, not a single viral tweet. Respect for that tradition matters because it separates serious eternalism from a mood board about fate. There is a related idea called the B series of time, named in a tradition going back to early 20th century philosophy. The rough summary is that events are ordered by relations like earlier than and later than, without needing a moving spotlight called now. Presentism corresponds more closely to an A-series view, where past, present, and future are fundamentally different ontological categories. Eternalism aligns more naturally with the B-series picture. Naming these camps does not settle the fight. It only shows that the fight is old, organized, and not invented yesterday on social media. When you hear the block universe described as four-dimensionalism, this is the neighborhood of thought people have in mind. There is also a practical side that keeps relativity from being mere philosophy. Global positioning systems must account for time running slightly differently in orbit than in the ground. Satellites carry corrected clocks, so your phone can tell you where to turn. That is not a proof of the block universe. It is proof that time is not the invisible universal metronome of everyday intuition. Time is physical, measurable, and tied to gravity and motion. Once time is physical in that strong sense, asking whether it flows like a river is no longer just poetry. It is a question about the structure of reality supported by equations. From here, we need to slow the excitement and mark a boundary that popular videos sometimes blur. Relativity is well tested. Eternalism is an interpretation of what relativity might mean for existence. Those are not the same status. The next block is about honesty, because a science channel earns trust by separating elegant stories from settled facts. Is the block universe proven? No. That answer should be stated plainly and early enough that nobody feels tricked. Eternalism is a philosophical interpretation compatible with relativity, not a laboratory result you can verify by looking through a telescope and seeing tomorrow printed on the sky. Experiments have confirmed many predictions of relativity with stunning precision. Experiments have not demonstrated that past, present, and future all exist with equal ontological weight in the way eternalism claims. That distinction matters for intellectual hygiene. You can admire the elegance of the block picture and still say we do not know whether it is true. You can also reject it while accepting every tested prediction of modern physics. Other interpretations fit the same observational data. Some philosophers prefer presentism, some prefer the growing block, some prefer four-dimensionalism without committing to every popular slogan attached to it. Science at the frontier is often like that. Equations constrain stories. They rarely pick one story with absolute finality. Why then spend an entire journey on an unproven interpretation? Because it is serious, influential, and clarifying even when it is wrong. Thinking through eternalism teaches you what relativity changed about time. It forces you to separate experience from structure. It shows why free will questions sharpen rather than dissolve when physics gets involved. A good science video can explore a hypothesis deeply without selling certainty. The block universe is that kind of hypothesis. Fascinating, coherent in many ways, not crowned as fact. Some researchers look for hints of fundamental time asymmetry in cosmic signals or laboratory tests. Others study whether quantum gravity will restore a preferred time direction. So far, nothing has handed eternalism a trophy ceremony. Nothing has buried it in a shallow grave either. The situation is open. Open problems are not failures of science. They are invitations to measure more carefully and argue more precisely. A channel that pretends every cosmic topic is settled is not teaching science. It is selling comfort. When philosophers say interpretation, they mean a story that connects formal theory to what exists. Interpretations are judged by coherence, by compatibility with experiment, and by how well they preserve what we care about morally and emotionally. No interpretation wins on data alone at the moment. That can frustrate people who want physics to be an oracle. It should also relieve you. You are allowed to sit with multiple live options without feeling science has failed. Science did its job by constraining the options. Metaphysics still has work left. One might wonder why we remember the past and not the future if both directions exist in the block. Physics has a partial answer that is not the same as eternalism, but it rhymes. The thermodynamic arrow of time points from lower entropy toward higher entropy in our region of the universe. Processes leave traces forward more easily than backward. Memory is a physical process embedded in that arrow. You remember the past because your brain stores records of earlier events, not because the past glows brighter in metaphysics. Eternalists can accept the arrow as a feature inside the block, while denying that the arrow requires the future to be unreal. Presentists often treat the arrow as more central to what makes time time. Another honest disagreement, not a cheap trick. If you remember only one sentence from this section, let it be this: compatibility with data is not the same as confirmation of metaphysics. Eternalism passes the first test more easily than wild speculation. It does not automatically pass the second. Now that the honesty box is checked, we can ask a different question people often mix up with proof. Is the block universe a paradox? The block universe is not a paradox in the logical sense. A paradox is typically a contradiction, two claims that cannot both be true. Eternalism does not usually assert that the future both exists and does not exist. It asserts that future events exist in the same structural sense, past events that may assault intuition. But it is not the same as saying a statement is true and false at once. Calling it a paradox because it feels weird blurs feeling with logic. What eternalism does produce are intuitive puzzles, questions where common sense stumbles before philosophy catches it. If the future already exists, why do we feel we are choosing? If time does not flow fundamentally, why does perception insist it flows? If everything is already there, what do we mean by cause and effect? Those are real challenges. They are not proofs that eternalism is self-refuting. They are invitations to refine how we connect conscious life to physical structure. Compare two formulations to see the difference. A genuine paradox might say the future already exists and also can be changed in a way that erases its existence. The block universe normally does not say that. It says the future exists as part of spacetime, and your choices, if they are events, are included in that structure. You may dislike the implication. You may reject the metaphysics. You are not forced to accept an outright logical contradiction unless you add extra assumptions eternalists need not add. This is why teachers often say the block picture is an interpretation of reality, not a paradox about reality. Reality can be strange without being inconsistent. Quantum mechanics taught that lesson earlier. Relativity teaches it again with clocks and rulers. Our intuitions evolved for throwing spears and gathering fruit on savannas where speeds were low and gravity was effectively uniform. We should not be shocked when cosmic grammar sounds alien. Quantum mechanics enters many dinner conversations about time, and it is worth a brief caution. Some popularizers link eternalism to quantum interpretations with heavy metaphysics. Those links are contested. You do not need quantum theory to learn the block universe as a reading of relativity. You also should not pretend quantum mechanics has proven eternalism. The honest line for this channel is narrower. Relativity changed time. Quantum theory changed probability and measurement. Combining them into a final picture of reality is still unfinished business. The block universe belongs first to the relativity side of that story. Still, one major criticism of eternalism is not about logic at all. It targets the heart of lived time, the sense that now moves. That criticism deserves its own block, because if it succeeds, The flashlight on the road is not enough to save the view. The deepest objection to the block universe is often called the problem of the passage of time. If all of space-time already exists as a whole, what could it mean to say the present advances? Advancing along what? With respect to what? If you say time passes, you might secretly be introducing a second time dimension, a meta-time in which the spotlight moves. Then critics ask what makes that meta-time pass? And you risk an infinite regress of times measuring times without end. Defenders of eternalism reply that the passage is not a feature of the universe at large. It is a feature of conscious perspective. The flashlight beam, the projector frame, the reader's page turning. They deny that physics needs a global now marching forward. They claim our language of flow describes experience embedded in a static geometry. Opponents reply that experience alone cannot carry that much weight, that eliminating objective passage throws out something essential about change, not just an illusion about change. Psychologists have long noted that the felt present is thick, not point-like. A melody needs duration to be heard as melody. A word needs time to be spoken. That thickness might be the raw material from which we build the myth of a moving spotlight. Eternalists say the spotlight is a useful fiction for creatures like us. Presentists say the spotlight is the heart of reality and physics must eventually bow to it. Both sides take experience seriously. They disagree about what experience implies on the largest scale. That disagreement is the real cliff at the end of the road. This is where the debate stops being a pop science headline and becomes a genuine philosophical fight. Both sides can quote Einstein. Both sides can tell stories about clocks. Neither side can point to a simple experiment that settles whether the feeling of becoming is a clue about the world or a side effect of being a mind in the world. You should notice how often that pattern appears at the frontier. Data narrows options. It does not always crown a king. Some philosophers try middle paths. Growing block models say the past and present exist while the future is not yet real, preserving openness in one sense while keeping relativity's geometry in another. Presentism says only the present exists, which saves the feeling of a moving now but struggles with relativity's mixing of space and time. Eternalism keeps geometry clean at the cost of intuitive openness. Each package buys clarity somewhere and pays elsewhere. The trade is the real story, not a meme about time being an illusion. Growing block theorists sometimes say eternalism makes change an illusion. Eternalists reply that change is real as a pattern among events, like a wave is real, even though water molecules oscillate rather than travel end to end. The wave analogy has limits, but it shows how static structure can host dynamic appearance. When you watch the ocean, you see motion everywhere. When you analyze the motion, you find constraints and conservation laws. Time debates rhyme with that analysis. What looks like becoming might be describable without a global becoming operator running the universe. If eternalism is wrong, what are the alternatives that remain respectable? We are close to the end of the line, and we should walk through them carefully rather than as a rushed list. Yes, the block universe can be wrong. Intellectual honesty requires saying that as clearly as saying it can be inspiring. Presentism holds that only the present exists. The past is gone. The future is not yet real. That matches everyday speech so well that many people assume it must be physics too. Presentism faces serious tension with relativity, which is why not all philosophers consider it viable in its simplest form. Still, variants and defenses exist, because the pull of the moving now is powerful. Relativity also introduced light cones, a way to diagram which events can influence which. From any event, there is a future region signals can reach if they travel at or below the speed of light, and a past region signals could have come from. Events outside that cone are space-like separated, which is another way of saying no signal connects them without exceeding the speed limit of the cosmos. Different observers can disagree about time order for space-like separated events. That disagreement is not sloppiness, it is geometry. Eternalism reads geometry as ontology. Presentism tries to preserve a moving now despite geometry. The light cone picture is why the debate is hard, not why it is easy. The growing block universe offers another path. In that view, the past and present exist, but the future does not yet. Reality accumulates like a universe that keeps adding pages to a manuscript already thick with earlier chapters. It tries to preserve objective becoming while acknowledging that relativity makes a universal present problematic. Eternalism, by contrast, treats past, present, and future as equally real regions of spacetime. Three menus, 3 different bills to pay. As of today, no experiment has distinguished these metaphysical packages with the kind of clarity physics usually loves. We can measure time dilation. We cannot measure whether Tuesday next week exists in the same sense Tuesday last week did. That gap is frustrating if you want a final answer. It is also humbling. It reminds us that science often delivers equations first and existential comfort later, sometimes much later, sometimes never. So where does that leave you listening to this narration? It leaves you with a live question, not a souvenir certainty. The block universe is a serious way to interpret the success of space-time physics. It is not a settled fact about your tomorrow. You can find it beautiful and still reserve judgment. You can find it threatening and still learn from the arguments that built it. Both reactions are part of the human encounter with deep time. Let us return to the feeling we started with. The private clock in your head. You will leave this video and notice evening arriving, hunger arriving, messages arriving. The flow will feel as undeniable as it felt before. Eternalism does not ask you to deny that feeling. It asks whether the feeling is a window into the cosmos or a window into how minds like ours ride world lines inside the cosmos. That question may outlast every one of us, the way the old questions about the stars outlasted the campfires where they were first spoken. Maybe time passes like a river. Maybe time is a dimension in a block we experience slice by slice. Maybe only the present is real. Maybe the block grows as the future crystallizes. We do not yet have the experiment that turns one of those sentences into a monument and the others into footnotes. What we have is a theory of space-time that changed how informed people speak about clocks, gravity, and simultaneity, and a family of interpretations trying to tell us what that theory means for existence itself. If the block universe is correct, your life is a continuous world line in a 4-dimensional structure, and consciousness moves along it like a reader through a bound book. If it is not correct, the block still functioned as a lens, sharpening what we mean when we say past, present, and future. Either way, you have done the work of thinking like a Science Channel audience should think, with curiosity, with skepticism, and with room for wonder that does not confuse wonder with proof. If you are still unsure what to believe, you are in good company. Working physicists hold a range of private views about time. Some ignore the metaphysics and use the equation. Some advocate eternalism in seminars. Some defend presentist-flavored intuitions and spend careers trying to make them fit relativity. The block universe is not a cult password. It is a serious option in a hard field. Treating it that way protects you from both hype and dismissal. Tonight, when you close your eyes, memories will probably arrive uninvited. Plans for next week will probably intrude. Hunger will remind you that bodies are timed processes. None of that disappears because eternalism is on the table. What might change is the story you tell yourself about what those experiences mean in the cosmos. Maybe the story is a block. Maybe the story is a river. Maybe the story is a growing manuscript. You can live well while the jury is out. Science has never required metaphysical certainty to improve maps, medicines, and machines. It only requires curiosity disciplined by evidence. Let us return to the central claim one more time, because repetition here is not circularity. It is clarity. Eternalism says the past, present, and future exist in the same structural sense within space-time. It does not say you already know what will happen. It does not say your feelings are fake. It does not say science has closed the case. It says our best geometric theory of time makes the flow of moments look more like perspective than like a universal conveyor belt carrying the cosmos forward. You can reject that reading and remain scientifically literate. You can accept it and still floss, pay bills, and apologize when you are wrong. Interpretations live above the lab bench, not inside the microwave. There is also a quieter emotional reason people dislike the block universe. If all moments exist, grief can feel frozen inside a crystal, as if lost loved ones are specimens rather than persons we knew in motion. Presentism at least matches the ache of absence by saying the past is gone. Eternalists respond that persons were never only instantaneous snapshots. They were processes. Grief responds to the shape of a process that ended along one direction of experience. That answer will not comfort everyone. It shows again that the debate is not only about clock, it is about what we need time to mean in order to live with love and loss. Perhaps the fairest summary is this: the block universe is one of the most fascinating interpretations of reality modern physics has handed to philosophy. It turns a book, a film reel, and a geometry diagram into a question about your place in the cosmos. It is simple to state, difficult to accept, and impossible to confirm with a single dramatic experiment today. Whether it is true may remain open longer than our lifetimes. The value of learning it is that you stop confusing what you feel with what has been proved, and you start seeing where evidence ends and interpretation begins. That is the skill every science story should leave in your hands. Welcome to the block universe, whether you end up believing in it or arguing against it. The invitation is not to surrender your intuition, but to test it against a theory that has survived more than a century of hard measurement. Keep the feeling of time. Keep the skepticism too. Both belong in the same thoughtful person. Thank you very much for joining me on this journey through the cosmic mysteries. And until next time, keep looking up.